Hello again, fight fans. Welcome back to the Neutral Corner, episode 113. I am Michael Montero for Boxing Monthly Magazine and BoxingMonthly.com. And if you're watching this on YouTube, then by now that you've noticed that there's no picture, there's no video. The reason for that is I had to break down the studio, the green screen studio setup I had here at the house, because I'm actually preparing my home to put it on the market. I got a 2-bedroom condo here in Los Angeles, and I converted one room into a studio, but I can't show the house that way or the condo that way when I sell it. So I had to convert it back into just a regular bedroom. So for the next couple months, we're going to be doing TNC like this, where it's just going to be the audio file. And for those of you listening on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, for you guys, it's just business as usual with TNC. But for you guys on YouTube, it's going to be a little funny for a while. Please bear with me as I go through this process, trying to sell this home and get into a bigger one so I can do an even bigger studio. More to come with that. We might do some like on location episodes or something like that. Maybe I'll do some episodes from the gym or something, or maybe even for the roof of my building, Montero on rooftops. All right. So it's just going to be like this for a little while, and then we'll get back to the studio setup that you guys are used to, where you get to see my beautiful, handsome face talk about boxing. One quick housekeeping note that I remind you guys of every week. Please do go to iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, drop a rating, drop a review, spread the word about those podcasts, tweet them out. If you guys want to copy me, I'll blast your stuff out there. I'll retweet it, get your word out or your name out there as well. And also spread the word about the channel here on YouTube. And thank you once again, as always, to our Patreon supporters. You guys are awesome. Okay, we had a ton of big news to catch up on, so let's get right into it. News and notes. Okay, before I get into the big news, and I know you guys are ready for me to talk about some of this stuff, I wanted to quickly talk about Scott Westgarth, who fought last Saturday, February 24th, last Saturday in the UK, won the fight, but collapsed in the dressing room after the fight and actually died in the hospital. He's dead at 31 years old. We lost another one of our boxing brothers, guys. And despite all the divisions in this sport and the politics and the infighting and all that, we can all agree that this is a brotherhood in boxing. And I just wanted to express my thoughts and everything for the Westgarth family. And guys, you know, next time you go to the gym and you're getting ready to beat up on that heavy bag, that speed bag, ready to do some sparring, whatever it is, think inside your mind, think the name Scott Westgarth, do a 10 count for him. I think every fighter that we lose in this most brutal of sports deserves that. Okay, let's get to the big breaking news today, which obviously was Canelo Alvarez popping on a VADA test for Clenbuterol. Now, a lot of you guys were asking for a rant video, and you want to know my thoughts on this because I've talked a lot about this performance-enhancing drugs issue over the last year or so. I will delve into it in more detail once we have more details, but let me give you the information that I have right now, okay? This was a test performed by VADA on February 17th. This was the A sample. So every sample they take, they do an A sample and a B sample, and the A sample came back positive for Clenbuterol, which of course is a banned substance. I've talked about it before on my channel about the benefits and why some athletes use it and why it's banned, okay? It has been related to contaminated meat in several countries, and I'll talk more about that in a second. So there's some nuance there, and there's some controversy about should it be on the banned list, the prohibited list that WADA sets, and if it is, should there be certain thresholds, et cetera, kind of like meldonium and the issues we've had with that substance. But back to this test. So when I say positive, okay, that means more than zero. That means some. But these were trace amounts. How trace? The sample came back with 0.08 nanograms per milliliter of Clenbuterol. What is a nanogram? A nanogram is 1 billionth of a gram. Not millionth with an M, billionth with a B. So 0.08 billionth of a gram of clenbuterol was found in a urine test, in the A sample of a urine test performed by or collected by VADA on February 17th. VADA collects the sample, they send it off to the lab. So the lab people contacted everybody. Both teams are aware. They've already talked to Bob Bennett, Nevada State Athletic Commission, with how to proceed. Canelo and Golden Boy released a statement. I don't even need to read through that, because if you guys are on all the boxing blogs, everybody immediately posted it. Even though all they do is copy and paste and try to pretend it's their story, it's really just a statement from Golden Boy that they're posting on their blog to get a clickbait. Okay, so you guys have already seen the statement from Golden Boy. Canelo is cooperating fully with all the questions and everything like that, and he is taking his training camp from Mexico to America, which is where it should have been from the start. The guy's been training in San Diego in recent years. I don't know what the hell he was doing in Mexico to start with, but he is cooperating and he's being totally open. He's willing to take additional testing from VADA at his own expense, of course, whatever the ruling is from the BC and all the parties involved. So we will see how this whole thing is adjudicated over the next days and weeks, okay? Everybody went nuts on the internet today, and it hasn't even reached the sports centers. Tomorrow, by the time you guys are listening to this podcast, it's going to be on the ESPNs, the Max Kellermans, the Stephen A. Smiths, the Skip Baylesses. They're going to be talking about this crap, and it's going to be nutty. None of these people have the sophistication, the knowledge about what's going on in how these tests are performed and everything else. You're just going to see headlines that say Canelo tests positive, because it's a clickbait type of headline, and these sites all make money based on clicks and views, right? That generates their ad revenue. So that's what you're going to be seeing and hearing in the coming weeks. There's going to be a huge fallout from this, but I could tell you right now, there's no way the fight's getting canceled. It's going to go forward. And there's a lot, people need to be really, really careful the way they talk about this stuff, okay? And I've been guilty in the past of tweeting things without clearly reading it and thinking about the words I was using, saying things in videos that I could have said more clearly. There's a lot of nuance. It's a living, breathing organism, this performance-enhancing drugs testing business is. There's so much gray area. So people need to be careful. But I'm going to post a couple links here on this podcast to releases from WADA and USADA as it is related to clenbuterol and the worldwide issue with clenbuterol being used in certain parts of the world for livestock, to get the livestock to grow bigger, stronger, faster, because they make more money that way. Clenbuterol is routinely used in countries like China. I know they use it in swine and pigs. And I know in Mexico they use it, I believe, in poultry and beef. So it's commonly used in those countries, but also other parts of the world. For what it's worth, use in livestock is banned here in the United States, and it is banned in the European Union. Funny enough, in the United States, you can inject your livestock with hormones. We're cool with that, but we don't allow you to enhance the livestock with clenbuterol here. So, okay. My initial thoughts, my gut feel. There's two ways you guys can look at this, okay? You can look at it as there's traces of this substance found in this urine sample. Canelo has the right, the fighter has the right to demand the B sample be tested if they feel that the A sample may have been contaminated in the chain of custody, the process from the person collecting the sample, sending it through the mail, all the way to the lab, and the lab people processing it. Canelo, at the time I'm recording this, has not requested that, and I don't think he will. There have been other fighters who have popped on tests in recent years. Some of them have popped multiple times, and they have demanded that the B sample be tested, and the B sample has come back positive as well. So because, you know, they were trying to insinuate that the chain of custody, the lab, even VADA, the people involved, were contaminating, or that there was some kind of foul play or conspiracy at play, which I thought was tasteless and disgusting by those fighters and their defenders. I don't think Canelo's going to do that. I don't think we're going to get the B sample tested. Maybe you will, maybe. But I think what's going to happen here is Canelo's going to come to America, where he should have been training the whole time anyway, and he's going to have more stringent testing from VADA, and they're going to release the results of those tests throughout. And I think that everything will come back negative and the fight will go forward. That's my gut feel. Now, sometimes when trace elements of these banned substances, and they're all different and people use them for different reasons, but sometimes when you see trace elements like this, it can indicate a fighter microdosing. Without getting into all the science behind microdosing, because I don't want to talk forever about this subject here, it's a way for an athlete to use little tiny amounts of a banned substance to where they can dilute their urine while using it so it doesn't hit or pop on a test. So that is a method that some athletes use to dope. They do microdosing. Clenbuterol really isn't used as a masking agent, or I guess you could do microdosing, but I don't think you'd really get the benefits from what it does for you, microdosing. And there really hasn't been any cases from a notable athlete using it as a masking agent for other performance enhancing drugs. So when you look at the combined history with contaminated meat in Mexico, and there was a study done, I want to say it was like 4 or 5 years ago, where over 100 livestock slaughterhouses were examined, and I think 25% of them came back. I think it might have been more than that. It might have actually been like a third came back contaminated. So there is an issue there. And there's even a bigger issue in China. Now, you might be asking, why don't we hear about a bunch of Chinese boxers popping for clenbuterol? Well, there just aren't as many Chinese boxers, guys. There have been plenty of athletes over there that have tested, and there have been people who have suffered from what they call clenbuterol poisoning over there that aren't even athletes. And when it comes to Mexican contaminated meat, we've had NFL players vacation in Mexico in the off season with their family, come back for like mini camp and stuff in the summer and test positive for clenbuterol. So it's something that there is an issue there, and the testing authorities make it very, very clear. In fact, I think WADA has several releases where they warn teams like Olympic teams or amateur teams in various sports traveling to these countries to only eat at restaurants who certify that they buy their meat from slaughterhouses that confirm that they don't have contaminated meat, that they don't use those substances with their livestock. So there's all kinds of releases. I'll post a couple of them on this video, but you guys can just go to Google. You could go to WADA's site and you could see all this stuff. So my gut feel here is that everything's going to work out. Fight's going to go forward. It's going to cause a lot of, it could work as a benefit for the people involved, because it's going to be a lot of free promotion from people who don't normally talk boxing, who are going to be talking about Canelo Alvarez now because of this positive test. One quick note before I move on to the next thing. You guys, I've taken a lot of flack from you guys about the way I reported the Alexander Povetkin situation, the Lucas Brown situation, the Luis Ortiz situation. Every one of these situations is completely different than the other. Yes, sometimes there are parallels and comparisons, sure. But every single one, you have to take them by a case-by-case basis, and you have to look at the sequence of events preceding the test and after the test. You have to look at where the fighter was, what was going on. There's always a story there. And right now, we don't have the sequence of events, all the details from this Canelo Alvarez situation. So as that comes out, I will report it. But for right now, I don't see a major red flag that makes me that concerned. All of this is consistent with cases we have seen before of contaminated meats as it relates to clenbuterol. For the record, Canelo Alvarez paid for the full VADA panel last year in his fight with Golovkin, and he's never failed a drug test before. Same thing with Golovkin. Here's the thing, though. That doesn't mean that these guys are 100% clean for certainty. We don't know that, because even if you're getting tested for the 8 to 10 weeks you're in camp, if you're fighting twice a year, you're in camp 4 or 5 months a year. Cool. What do you do in those other 7, 8 months of the year back home in your home country? We don't know. So even if these guys are doing the full VADA panel and they're paying for it at their own expense during camp for a fight, that means that they're clean during camp, but we still don't know for sure what they're doing outside of camp. So the only guys that we know who we can say for certainty are 100% clean are guys who are being routinely, regularly tested throughout the year. Now, a lot of you guys talk about the WBC clean boxing program that in theory is supposed to do that, but because their budget is so small, most of the ranked fighters are only getting tested once or twice a year through that program. If that, there are dozens of fighters who don't even get tested every year. So just because you're in that program doesn't necessarily mean you're being tested every month or every week or anything like that. So you guys got to remember all these things, okay? There's a lot of nuance here. You got to be very careful. If you're a guy who does a blog or you got a YouTube channel or even a Twitter page where you talk about boxing and stuff, maybe you got a Facebook page, you talk about boxing, be very, very careful in the words you use, okay? This stuff is very nuanced, all right? So be careful what you're reading, be careful what you're posting. Okay, moving on to Nery, which correlates in a way to this Canelo story because he's a fellow Mexican fighter. He's tested positive before, right? And he blamed it on the Mexican contaminated meat. That was last year when he scored that win over Shinsuke Yamanaka to win a title. And now, this week, or last week, I should say, he came in 5 pounds overweight. And this dude ain't a cruiserweight coming 5 pounds overweight. This is a bantamweight coming in 5 pounds overweight. Absolutely disgusting, inexcusable. Yet the fight goes on. He wins by knockout. I think last year it was a 4-round knockout. This year it was a 2-round knockout. And the WBC has suspended him indefinitely. To use their words, and this is a quote from them, "For a bantamweight champion to arrive at the official weigh-in 5 pounds over is simply unacceptable." I agree with this wholeheartedly. I give the WBC a lot of crap, but I also give them credit when they do something right. Now, they're going to have a hearing, and Nery is going to plead his case, and this, that, the other. They're obviously going to suspend the dude, but they're not going to suspend him for life. They want that sanctioning fee, and they don't want to take this guy's livelihood for quote-unquote one mistake. So how long would the suspension be? Now, Steve Kim, in his podcast, made a point that he's tweeted about this, that if it's a 6-month suspension, who cares? A lot of these fighters only fight twice a year anyway. So you're not killing the guy. This should be a 2-year suspension. Make a statement. Now, I've been brutal in my criticism of guys like Gervonta Davis, Adrien Broner, and others for missing weight like this. And I'm going to be no less brutal with Nery. He needs to be suspended for at least 2 years. Okay? Anything less than a year suspension is a slap in the face to boxing fans. And I go back to what I said with the Canelo situation about the sequence of events. This guy tests positive last year, right? Tests positive for a banned substance, knocks out Yamanaka, who had never been knocked out, never lost up until that point. Subsequently, fights a stay busy kind of fight a few months later and is dropped in that fight, struggles, but pulls out the win. Doesn't look quite as good. And now sits off that whole time, right? I think he was out for a few months, whatever, but gets back in camp, and then fights Yamanaka again, comes in 5 pounds overweight, knowing he's being drug tested, right? So for a guy who made weight, had no problems making weight before when he tested positive, and then comes in 5 pounds over, knowing he's being tested this time so he can't use, that sequence of events looks very suspicious. Completely different situation and sequence of events than what we know right now about Canelo Alvarez. And that's why I say you guys have to look at the nuance of every situation differently. I look at Luis Nery right now and I'm highly suspicious. And if I was advising or managing or promoting a fighter who is going to face Luis Nery, I would want crazy stringent testing. I'd want this guy tested dozens of times before I got in the ring with him. So more to come with this. We'll find out what the WBC does. Okay, other news. Adrien Broner versus Omar Figueroa is off. Honestly, does anybody give a shit? Who really was excited for this fight? I know I wasn't. So Figueroa got a DUI, I think it was, last month? Or maybe it was in January, I think. And he's due in court later this month to deal with the ramifications of that. But on the arrest sheet, it listed him at like over, I think it was over 170 pounds. So you can see that this guy was having trouble. He was not going to make weight probably. He's saying he has an injured shoulder. I don't buy it, but I really don't give a shit either way. Now, Broner's still going to fight on the card. He's probably going to fight Jessie Vargas. So here's the silver lining. Broner, Jessie Vargas, in my opinion, is a more competitive fight than Broner Figueroa. It might not be as fan-friendly because Figueroa wants to, he likes to brawl, and I think Broner had a good chance of winning that fight. I favored him to win that fight for various reasons. But now against Jessie Vargas, I favor Vargas. I just think he's the fresher fighter. He's got more to him at this stage of his career. And I think we're going to have a more competitive fight that's going to bring out more out of Broner. So I think we'll get a higher level fight. I don't know if it'll be as exciting, quote unquote, as a Broner-Figueroa fight might have been. But all things considered, silver lining in the gray cloud. I like Jessie Vargas against Broner. I think he's going to beat him. Okay, one more item of news. Apparently, Manny Pacquiao has rejected the fight against Mike Alvarado that was supposed to be on the co-main of the Jeff Horn-Terence Crawford fight. He says, and I quote, it was an insult, or it's an insult. That fight is an insult. He's right, but it was an insult to fans from the jump. I'm sure none of you guys were excited about it. Here's what I really think Manny Pacquiao. I'm just going to translate for Manny. I think this was his ego being unable to accept being the co-main to Jeff Horn-Terence Crawford. How the mighty have fallen, right? I think it had to do more with that because this guy has fought some overmatched opponents and pay-per-views where he charged fans $80 a head to fight an overmatched fighter who had no business being on a pay-per-view. He had no problem doing that if it was the main event and he was getting paid crazy, crazy money. But for a lot less money in a co-main, it's an insult. I'm not buying it, Manny. I think that your pride got a little hurt and you weren't having it. All right, guys, that's it for the news and notes. We got a lot to review, so let's get to it. All right, Wednesday, February 28th, Daniel Roman wins a unanimous decision over Ryu Matsumoto, defending his WBA 122-pound title for the first time. This was in Tokyo. His last fight where he won the title last year was over in Japan, I believe in Kyoto. So he looks good. He's peaking right now, Roman. He's a problem for anybody in that division, and there's plenty of guys he can unify against. And he's ready. I think his team should think about doing that. Now, very next day, Thursday, March 1st, there was the card I talked about a second ago in news and notes. Luis Nery scores a TKO 2 win over Shinsuke Yamanaka, but loses his WBC bantamweight title on the scales. That title is now vacant. Yamanaka retires after this fight, which he should. He's ready. I think he's had a long, distinguished career. He was one of the better bantamweights for a while there. But I really, really struggled with this fight going forward. I just didn't think it should have happened. I understand Yamanaka wanted the payday, and I think that Nery, since he missed weight, a portion of his purse, additional portion, went to Yamanaka. So I get that he wanted the payday and everything. He wanted revenge. But man, when you have one guy who's in his 30s killing himself to make weight, man, it is hard to make weight, guys. When you're in your 30s, your mid-30s, it's hard. And then you have a young guy coming in 5 pounds overweight, which tells me that's a red flag, a dead giveaway, that they knew they weren't going to make weight and just didn't even bother trying. They just got ready for a fight. They just got in shape for a fight. So you got a young guy in his physical prime not even trying to make weight, and you have another guy killing himself to make weight. That alone changes the dynamic of the fight so much that this fight really shouldn't have went forward. For Team Nery, it's so unprofessional and disgusting. They could have, weeks before the fight, contacted Yamanaka's team and said, look, we can't make weight. We're not going to make weight. We're off. Can we do a catch weight? Can we do a fight at 122, 123? That way you guys can take it easy. You don't have to kill yourself. And let's do, let's put the title vacant. And they could have at least tried to negotiate that. Now, Yamanaka, maybe he wouldn't have had it. But they could have tried. They could have reached out. That would have been the professional thing to do. So anyway, this fight went forward. Nery, I talked about the sequence of events. I talked about the comparison to guys like Gervonta Davis. You got to put him in that same bucket. But even more so, because Gervonta Davis, for all the issues he's had, not making weight, being unprofessional, guys never failed a drug test. So, to me, this Luis Nery, highly suspicious, and he needs to be suspended. Saturday, March 3rd in Puerto Rico, Jason Velez scores a TKO win in the 12th and final round over Juan Manuel Lopez. And look, good win for Velez. He's got Puerto Rican bragging rights, right? But for Juanma Lopez, it is time to retire. It has been time to retire for years. This guy is 5-6 in his last 11 fights going back to 2011. All 6 losses, he was stopped, sometimes brutally stopped. So you look at a guy's record. If you saw a fighter's record as 5-6, what would you call him? You call him a journeyman. Now, against elite level, he's fought some good fighters, Juanma has. So, I'm not saying that to be disrespectful when I say journeyman. What I'm saying is his record over the last 7 years is 5-6 with 6 knockout losses. That's a journeyman's record, guys. It's time for him to retire. Somebody in his team needs to have a hard discussion, a hard talk with him, and tell him the truth. Now, in the UK, Josh Taylor was supposed to fight Humberto Soto, a little bit of a buzzkill. Soto cut himself in sparring. So Nicaraguan Winston Campos is pulled in at the last second, and Taylor does what he's supposed to do, scores a TKO 3 win. He is now 12-0 with 11 knockouts, defends his WBC 140-pound silver title for the second time. Also in the UK, Kell Brook gets back in the win column, scores a second-round knockout over Sergey Rabchanka. Get this, for the vacant WBC silver junior middleweight title. Now, I tweeted about this. How the hell does the WBC sanction this as a title fight? And the silver title is kind of like their interim title, their mandatory number one spot kind of title. So it's not the full title, I get it. But even for this silver title, how do you sanction this? This junior middleweight title, okay, 154 pounds. Brook was coming off 2 losses. One of them was at 147 pounds to Errol Spence. The one before that was at 160 pounds to Gennady Golovkin. In both of those fights, he was brutally beat up. His face was literally broken, and he was stopped. Neither one was at 154 pounds. Brook has never fought at 154, at least against not, a high-level opponent. So how the hell does the WBC justify this? I don't understand them sometimes. Again, I give them credit when they do some things right, but I have to give them criticism when they do some things wrong. And they do so much wacky shit like this, where it's obvious they just want them, Eddie Hearn dollars. That's just all they want. I can't help but chuckle at this. It's so ridiculous. Also, on this card, formerly undefeated prospect Gamal Yafai, who's the younger brother of Khalid Yafai and has nowhere near as high of a ceiling as a fighter. He suffers his first loss, a unanimous decision to Gavin McDonald. So, okay, let's come over here to the United States, where we had dual cards on HBO and Showtime in the same market. Let's start with the card that was announced first. well before the Showtime card was announced. Main events had a card in Madison Square Garden. Dmitry Bivol scores a TKO 12 win over Sullivan Barrera. I was highly impressed with his performance. He did have to battle through a little bit of adversity. He had a cut. He had a hematoma on his forehead. So he had to battle a little bit. But he proved that his power and his skill set is legit. He was up 109-100 on all three scorecards before the stoppage. I thought Barrera won a couple rounds. You could have gave a couple rounds to Barrera. Either way, Bivol is now 13-0 with 11 knockouts. And there's a lot of people out there who are, I guess, they're looking at Barrera. They're overlooking Barrera. I don't know what the right word. I'm struggling to find the right word here. But they're just dissing him as if he wasn't a proven top 5 light heavyweight coming into this fight. He absolutely was. And it's really undermining Bivol's accomplishment in his 13th professional fight, dominating and stopping a fighter like this. This was a great performance. When you look at the punch numbers, okay, I got some CompuBox graphics up here that they sent me. I'm looking at this. And total punches, when you look at the averages per round, both guys threw 56 punches a round, which is a little more than the light heavyweight average. And they landed a little more than average. Barrera landed 16.4 punches, Bivol 17.6 punches. So when you're looking at punch numbers, this was a very close fight. When you look at jabs, both guys landed about 5 jabs around and about a dozen power punches around. Very, very even. The difference was Bivol's punches are so much heavier. Guy punches through the target. His offense is his defense, right? Barrera, it was a proven, good, solid light heavyweight. He had only lost once coming into this fight against Andre Ward, and he was dropped in that fight by Ward, but he came back and fought hard, and he put some leather on Ward. He won a few rounds in that fight. Look at Andre Ward's face after that fight with Sullivan Barrera, and that was Barrera's first test. He was inexperienced going into that fight. He learned so much in that fight. This version of Sullivan Barrera that Dmitry Bivol beat last Saturday at MSG was a better version than Andre Ward beat a couple years ago. Seriously, guys. It was a more battle-tested, fully developed version of Barrera that Bivol dominated. For him to do that in his 13th pro fight, this is just kind of like falling under the radar on all the podcasts and shows. They're not talking about this enough. This is a big deal. This was a good win for him. And he proved that he's probably the second, third best light heavyweight in the world right now. And he might ultimately be the best. We might be looking at the future of this division. That's certainly the way it looks with the eye test. In the main event, Sergey Kovalev scores a 7th round TKO win over Igor Mikulkin, who everyone is now calling Macaulay Culkin on all the podcasts, which is kind of hilarious. Now, look, this fight was a beatdown. That's what we thought was going to happen, right? Interesting, again, you look at the punch numbers here. I'm just reading this off CompuBox. Macaulay Culkin threw 75 punches a round. Kovalev only threw 50 a round. Mikulkin landed 18 punches a round. Kovalev only landed 15. The difference is Sergey's punches are just so much heavier. He beat the hell out of this guy and cut him up. Dude was bleeding profusely. And finally, the corner, the fight was stopped in the 7th round, and it was kind of a mercy stoppage. There was no reason for the fight to continue. Now, I told you guys last week in the preview portion of episode 112 that this German-based, I think he's a Ukrainian native, was going to go rounds. When this fight was first announced, everyone thought, oh, this is the Shabransky fight again. No, this dude had over 200 amateur fights. Guys like that know how to survive a little and spoil a little. He was a southpaw, and that gave Kovalev some things to think about. So all in all, I think this was a good performance for Sergey. Got him some rounds in, but obviously this was just freaking target practice, right? He needs to step up the opposition. Now, for what it's worth, Bivol, after the fight, after the win over Barrera, said that he is willing to fight Sergey Kovalev next. And that's what he told me when I talked to him when he was here in Los Angeles a week or two ago at the Superfly card. Kovalev told me when I talked to him that he's willing to fight Bivol. But in the post-fight interview with Max Kellerman on HBO, he didn't seem overly anxious to jump in the ring with Bivol next. Main Events, his promoter, is apparently talking about a Joe Smith Jr. fight next. Now, I'm only cool with that if that is a stay busy fight over the summer and they fight Bivol in the fall. The Kovalev-Bivol fight needs to happen this year. If it doesn't, shame on Sergey Kovalev and shame on Main Events. That fight needs to happen. I get if they want to fight Joe Smith Jr. in the summer. Let's remember, Kovalev's a Russian guy. New York has a very large Russian population, that whole area. Joe Smith is from Long Island, the suburbs of New York. So that fight makes sense back there in New York at MSG or somewhere in that area. Makes a lot of sense. So I get if they want to come back in June or July or something and do that fight, cool. And that makes sense for a summer broadcast on HBO Championship Boxing. That fits into their budget and everything. It works out perfect. But then come back later in the year, in the fall, and fight Dmitry Bivol. That fight needs to happen this year. I know Bivol and his team are more than willing to do it. Is Sergey and his team willing to do it? We'll find out. I hope so. Now, going across the river into Brooklyn, the hipster capital of the East Coast, there was a card on Showtime, obviously. You might have heard about it. On the undercard, Sergey Derevyanchenko, Willie Monroe Jr., and prospect Gary Antoine Russell all stayed busy and scored wins. This was a good, solid card top to bottom, man. Lou DiBella did a good job with this card, putting together a lot of good fights on the undercard for the fans there to watch and keep them entertained. And for the most part, they all delivered, man. In the co-main, Jose Uzcategui, and I've heard his last name pronounced 8 billion different ways. The guys on Showtime were saying Uzcategui the other night, so I'm going to go with that. I've also heard Uzcategui. I've heard all kinds of stuff. But Jose Uzcategui scores a 8th round retirement win over Andre Durrell and wins the interim IBF super middleweight title. And Caleb Truax is the full champion. So at some point, he is going to get a crack at Caleb Truax. I think Truax, before fighting Uzcategui, is going to do a rematch with James DeGale. I think that's what we're going to see first, which, I welcome that. So Uzcategui might end up fighting James DeGale, depending on how that fight goes, that rematch. We'll see. At the time of the stoppage, I thought that Judge Tony Paolillo, his score of 79-73 was correct. The other two judges had it a little too close. I didn't think Durrell did anything more than win maybe one round in this fight. He looked horrible. Uzcategui is from Venezuela, now based in Tijuana. Very tall and lanky. He has a very similar build to Gilberto Zurdo Ramirez, who I think is the best in this division right now. I think you have to rate Zurdo number 1. I think you have to rate David Benavidez number 2, George Groves number 3, but I'm putting the Venezuelan right in there at number 4. He is a live player in this division now. Okay, let's talk about the main event. And it was a big, big heavyweight showdown between Deontay Wilder and Luis Ortiz. Wilder wins by TKO in the 10th round, defending his WBC title, I believe for the 8th time, his WBC heavyweight title. So, good, solid heavyweight fight in terms of drama, in terms of back and forth, give and take, heart, determination shown by both men. In terms of all of that, good, solid heavyweight title fight, man. And for both of these guys, they were making a quantum leap in opposition. I think a lot of people were focusing only on Wilder finally stepping up, but this was Ortiz stepping up as well. And I know he's been ducked by some people, but real. He had fought nobody. I give him credit for the win against Bryant Jennings, okay? But that was in 2015. Coming into this fight, he was not the most proven heavyweight himself. And I'll talk more about that in a minute. But Wilder gets the win. He's now 40-0 with 39 knockouts. He finally has a win that he can really hang his hat on, where he really proved himself and exercised some demons. You could see it in his eyes that he really a lot of the criticism had gotten to him, and he wanted to prove people wrong and win this fight in an emphatic way, and he did. A lot of people are calling this the fight of the year. I'm not so sure about that. Definitely going to be a top 10 candidate by the end of the year. Could be a top 5 candidate. I hope not, because then that means we had a poor 2018. But was this fight really better? Was it really that much better than Rungvisai Estrada? I can tell you right now, Rungvisai Estrada round 12 is the round of the year. I don't know how anything's going to top that. I didn't think any round in this fight came anywhere near close to topping that. This was an exciting fight because it's heavyweights, and that amplifies everything because it's two huge guys. That always amplifies every aspect of the fight in terms of the atmosphere and the feel and the tension and all that stuff. But the back and forth, the give and take, and the skill deficit that I saw in this fight compared to, for me, Rungvisai Estrada, maybe it's not better. Maybe Wilder Ortiz is slightly better, but that's kind of like 1A and 1B right now. And I know for damn sure round 12 of Rungvisai Estrada was better than any round of Wilder Ortiz. So, best heavyweight fight we've seen since Joshua Klitschko, fine. At least at this level. Yes, I'll give you that. But for Brandon Schaub, this MMA guy, to tweet that it was the best heavyweight fight of all time. He didn't even say best heavyweight championship fight. He said the best heavyweight fight ever. That's ridiculous. And that guy has a show on Showtime where I know the focus is MMA, but he also talks boxing. That's just absolutely disgusting. I had to tweet about that and post about that because I need to have that damn show. Not some joker like that who has absolutely no idea what he's talking about. And people responded to him on Twitter saying, nah, man, this was a poor man's Joshua Klitschko. And he's going, no. This was better than Joshua Klitschko because Klitschko is old and coming off a layoff. Well, what the hell do you say about Luis Ortiz? You telling me that Luis Ortiz was better than Vladimir Klitschko, even though Klitschko was technically older and coming off a layoff and all that? The Vladimir Klitschko that fought Anthony Joshua would have knocked out Luis Ortiz. It would have been a jab and grab fest for several rounds. Yeah, I know it would have been boring and dull for a lot of you guys, but he would have worn him down and knocked him the hell out clean with one right hand. It wouldn't have been an accumulation of punches. So I just, best fight ever, best heavy, better than Joshua Klitschko. Get the hell out of here, man. Anyway, judges had it 85-84, 3 ways for Wilder after 9 rounds, which is laughable. I thought Luis Ortiz was winning the fight. Now, some people had him up by like 4 or 5 points. I think that's a bit ridiculous. He was dropped, and Wilder had worked his way back into the fight. And after surviving the 7th round, I should add, Ortiz, his offensive output drastically dropped after the 8th round. And I'll get into the punch numbers round by round in a second here, because this fight, I mean, the old man just completely shot his wad in the 7th round. And when you really break down that sequence, Ortiz really smothered his work and wasted a great opportunity. He looked amateurish in that sequence, in a way. So, I don't know. There's some parallels of this fight, between this fight and the Joshua Klitschko fight, which I'll talk about. But they're easy parallels, but there's a lot of differences, guys. A lot of differences. This was Wilder's version of, Joshua and Klitschko. I get that. But it was nowhere near as good of a fight. And I'm not saying that to hate on Wilder. This is a tremendous accomplishment from him, and I hope he can build from this and do even better. I think he could fight a lot better than he fought against Luis Ortiz. I thought, I didn't understand why he kept giving up his height and letting a guy who was slower than him, didn't move as fast with his feet or hands, it was punching up at him with less length, get inside continuously and land punches. Even though they were glancing blows, and Wilder rolled with a lot of them very, very well. I don't know if he was doing that to try to set him up or to tire him out, to shoot his wad. Maybe that was the strategy. And if it was, then you know what? It was genius. It worked. you know? So I'll give him credit for that if that was the case, but we got to see. A lot of people are complaining about after the 7th round how the ref invited the ring doctor over to inspect Wilder. This is something the New York State Athletic Commission has done multiple times in recent years since the tragedy involving Magomed Abdusalamov going back several years. So I understand why they do it. They just do it very inconsistently, and it's not a good look when you have 60 seconds between rounds that you could look at Wilder, yet you wait until after that and you take an extra like 30 seconds, breaking the action of the 8th round to inspect him. Yet you didn't do that the same way with Ortiz after the 5th round when he was dropped. It's just not a good look. They could have handled it better. And again, I always go back to the California State Athletic Commission being the best in the country. Every commission makes mistakes and has issues, but California just doesn't make these sorts of mistakes on a routine basis like New York does, like Texas does, and some of these other commissions. So New York could just do a much, much better job with stuff like this. But look, did Wilder get a little special treatment on the scorecards? Maybe from the ref and the ring doctor and the whole thing? Maybe, okay? But it's still on Ortiz to follow up in the 8th round and get him out of there. He didn't do it. Plus, he was the B-side. This is boxing. You know what? People say this is boxing. This is sports, guys. The home team, the A side, always gets preferential treatment in every damn sport on planet Earth. So to pretend that this is limited just to boxing or just to Deontay Wilder or just to PBC is laughable. Anthony Joshua gets preferential treatment. I thought he got preferential treatment in a Klitschko fight on multiple occasions, maybe to a lesser degree than this, but he got preferential treatment against Carlos Takam. That fight was stopped when it didn't need to be. This happens with A-sides. So I'm not surprised with the way the 7th round or that was handled. Are there other refs that would have stopped the fight? Yeah. Are there, if the situation was reversed and Ortiz had been on Queer Street like that, would the ref have jumped in and stopped it? TKO win for Wilder? Abso-freaking-lutely. But that coming in as the B-side. That's what you're facing. And that's just the reality of sports. If you're in the NFL and you are the Chicago Bears and you're playing the Dallas Cowboys in Arlington Stadium, or AT&T Stadium in Arlington, Texas, damn well some calls are going to go against you and go the way of the Dallas Cowboys. That coming into town, and you have to game plan for it and prepare for it. It's part of sports. So for a lot of people out there to suggest that this win isn't on the up and up for Deontay Wilder, I think that's absolutely ridiculous. It is. He deserves credit for surviving that 7th round and coming back and finishing the fight. However, he doesn't deserve the amount of credit that some people are giving him. Some people are overdoing it. They're going a little too far with this, okay? Let's look at Ortiz. Came into this fight over 241 pounds. Really should have been in the mid-230s. His blood pressure was high all week. The New York Commission had tested him several times. They were so concerned about him that they flew in Charles Martin Friday night to be on standby to possibly sub for Ortiz. Ortiz himself was not fully cleared by the New York State Athletic Commission to fight Deontay Wilder until Saturday morning. That is the condition this man was in going into this fight. Okay? So, taking all that into consideration, given the fact that this guy had beat nobody other than Bryant Jennings, who was coming off a loss to Vladimir Klitschko, who had already softened him up. Klitschko beat a better version of Jennings than Ortiz beat. Although he beat him emphatically, fine. But quantum leap in opposition here, plus that win was 3 years ago, guys. That was in 2015. This is 2018. All right, keep up. Taking all that into consideration, let me ask a serious question to you guys, and I want you to think about this. Was Luis Ortiz more of a test for Deontay Wilder than Sullivan Barrera was for Dmitry Bivol? Think about that for a second, because for me, yeah, they're two black Cuban guys, but that's where the comparisons end. I think Dmitry Bivol's win over Sullivan Barrera, a more battle-tested, more proven fighter coming in, than Luis Ortiz. I think that rate's higher for me than Deontay Wilder beating Luis Ortiz. Now, Wilder did it in more exciting fashion. It was more dramatic. It was a heavyweight fight. All that stuff, I get it. But I still think that this Bivol thing is flying under the radar. Okay, it's the similarities. You know, I talked about Joshua Klitschko and Wilder Ortiz. You know what? A prime Vladimir Klitschko would have iced Anthony Joshua in the 6th round of that fight. That right hand he landed was a few inches higher on the head than it usually lands. Go back and watch his fight with guys like Ruslan Shagayev and stuff. Look at those right hands. That right hand from a 2009 Vladimir Klitschko, a 2010 Vladimir Klitschko, lands a few inches lower, destroys AJ. He just now be getting up from it, okay? I think a prime Klitschko beats Anthony Joshua. I think that was clear based on what we saw in that fight. Just like in this fight, you could make an argument perhaps that a prime Luis Ortiz beats Deontay Wilder. A Luis Ortiz that weighed 231 pounds, let's say, and his blood pressure was in better control and he wasn't on meds for the last couple years. The guy that even we saw beat Bryant Jennings maybe would have had the stamina, the sharpness, the accuracy, the reflexes to get Wilder out of there in the 7th round, or maybe follow up in the 8th or 9th round to get him out of there, or just the stamina to not get hit with that big right hand in the 10th round that ended the fight. That big right hand that Deontay Wilder landed was his version of the big uppercut Joshua landed on Klitschko. In both situations, it was an older fighter, an older athlete, gassed, fatigued, and being just a little less sharp in those later rounds than they were in the earlier rounds, and shots that they were rolling with that weren't landing cleanly in the early rounds, the big shot landed late in the fight. That's what it was a case of. So there's the parallels where in both of those fights, old man is down early, but weathers the storm, battles back, and has their younger opponent hurt on Queer Street in bad shape. But the younger man, with his youthful energy, exuberance, fights back and lasts out. And proved himself with some toughness and some intestinal fortitude, some grit. But also the old guy faded like old guys do. That's the comparisons. Now the difference is, remember, Joshua Klitschko, I picked Klitschko to win by decision. This fight, Wilder Ortiz, I told you Wilder was going to stop him. Right? Different situation. Klitschko is in much better shape, even out that layoff and everything. Much better shape than Ortiz. Much better fighter, even that version of Klitschko. Much better athlete. And he was the same height pretty much as Anthony Joshua. They were punching straight at each other. Klitschko wasn't punching up at Anthony Joshua, right? So there are several differences here. Ortiz had fought absolutely nobody other than maybe Bryant Jennings, and we all know Vladimir Klitschko is one of the top dozen or so heavyweights of all time. So Wilder does seem to get a pass from a lot of people, and Wilder gets too much criticism from some people. I agree with that, but he also gets a pass from a lot of people for his fundamental flaws. They say, "Oh, he's got the eraser." You know, I don't care if he's fundamentally flawed. A lot of these are the same people who I think 2 or 3 years ago when Orlando Salido and Francisco Vargas fought the fight of the year, a lot of those same people were saying that was an unskilled fight with just two quote-unquote Mexican brawlers. Such bullshit and not fair. So the double standards from those groups, from people that talk that way, I can't get with that, okay? You got to be consistent across the board. Now let me talk real quick about some of these punch numbers, and then we'll leave it here. Wilder had a 33-6 edge in total punches, not just power punches, total punches in the last 2 rounds. So you could see the fatigue had set in. 18 of Wilder's 60 landed power punches were in the 10th round. So Wilder only landed 60 power punches the entire fight. Going into that 10th round, he had only landed 42 power punches. I don't know how those judges had him ahead. I think that, that's tough to look at. It's not a good look. 35 of Ortiz's 63 landed power punches, more than half of them, were in rounds 7 and 8. He was done after that. That was his last little hurrah, and that was it. In 33 of Ortiz's 87 landed punches were body punches. Now, let me tell you this. I'm just looking here at CompuBox round by round. Ortiz threw 70 punches in the 7th round. He threw 54 in the 8th round. He threw 25 in the 9th round. He threw 15 in the 10th round. He landed 1 jab in the 8th, 0 in the 9th, 0 in the 10th. That tells me a fighter is exhausted, okay? Sometimes punch stats do tell a story, guys. And I think the story here was the older fighter in poor physical shape, the inferior athlete, tired out late. The younger man weathered the storm, and when his man was tired, he went for the kill, and he got it. Impressive performance by Wilder. He is clearly the number 2 heavyweight in the world, but again, I don't rate this as high of a win as I rate Anthony Joshua's win over Vladimir Klitschko for a multitude of reasons. One last note on this fight, I promise, and then I'll move on. Deontay Wilder made, I think, $2.1 million. That was his purse. Anthony Joshua has made 8 figures several times. He'll make 8 figures again in a few weeks against Joseph Parker. For anyone to suggest that the eventual super fight that will take place next year in 2019 between Anthony Joshua and Deontay Wilder, for anyone to suggest that that is a 50-50 fight in terms of purse, you're an idiot. You're an absolute idiot, and you're being dishonest with yourself. It is not a 50-50 fight in terms of purse. Anthony Joshua will get the lion's share of the purse. Team Wilder knows this. Lou DiBella, Al Heyman, Shelly Finkel, they know this, okay? So let's put all that to bed. That's enough of the review. Let's get into the preview of what's coming up this week. All right, so I briefly talked about this last week, but Tuesday, March 6th in Chonburi, Thailand, Tamanun Nimamchong, or Knockout CP Freshmart, is defending his WBA strawweight title for the 4th time against Toto Londero. Also, Friday, March 9th on Showtime, it's a Showbox card from Deadwood, South Dakota. Regis Prograis is fighting Julius Ndongo for the interim WBC 140-pound title. Prograis was supposed to fight Victor Postol, which I really like that fight a lot, but Postol got hurt. Ndongo stepped in, and look, I love this replacement. Yeah, you gotta love Julius Ndongo's attitude, man. He will fight anybody at any time. For him, he's going to be coming off that loss to Terrence Crawford last year. Prograis is 20-0 with 17 knockouts, from New Orleans, but now lives and trains in Houston. That growing boxing market there in that region of Texas, with good gyms in Houston, Dallas, San Antonio, that part of the state. And he's making a big leap in opposition. This is his first big test. I like him big in this fight, though, man. I think he's going to make a statement. I think it's absolutely going to go rounds. Could go the distance, but I just see something in Prograis. He passes my eye test. This fight, he'll prove if he's a contender or a pretender. Now, Saturday, March 10th, we have a couple cards here in the States. Freeman Coliseum in San Antonio, Texas on Showtime. We have that main event, Sergey Lipinets versus Mikey Garcia, which I'll talk about in a second. But also on the card, Richard Comey versus Alejandro Luna. Comey is from Ghana. Good quality fighter, only 2 losses. One was a controversial split decision loss to Robert Easter. A lot of people felt it could have went either way. The other was a split decision to Denis Shafikov that should have been a unanimous decision for Shafikov. He clearly won that fight, I think like 7 rounds to 5, 8 rounds to 4. But somehow Adelaide Bird, where have we heard that name before? Somehow Adelaide Bird scored at 116-112 for Comey, which was just laughable. The other judges went the other way. Luna is an undefeated prospect from Bellflower, California. That's the LA area. Had over 100 amateur fights, but, you know, hasn't really fought anybody yet as a pro, so this is a step up for him. Both guys haven't fought in about a year, so we'll see how the ring rust affects them. In the co-main, Rancis Bartolome and Kirill Relic are fighting a rematch of their fight last year, which the Cuban won. And, you know, a lot of people feel that Relic deserved to win that fight. He outlanded Bartolome 248 to 137 in total punches, 190 to 91 in power punches, but the judges all had Bartolome wide on the cards. Bartolome is undefeated Cuban, former lightweight titleist. Relic is from Belarus. We'll see what happens in this rematch. They're fighting for that vacant 140-pound title. In the main event, Sergey Lipinets versus Mikey Garcia. This is the first defense of the IBF 140-pound title for Lipinets, who is a former kickboxing champ from Kazakhstan, now fights out of LA. He only had 40 amateur boxing fights and only 13 pro fights. He won the title last November. It was a vacant title, and he went through hell and back to win that title, man. So tough fight for him. Really does not have a whole lot of experience as a boxer, and I know Mikey Garcia sees that and sees that this is pretty much an easy way for him to go into a fourth weight class and win a fourth world title. Obviously, I like him big in this fight, and it's set up for him to fight the winner of the Bartholomew Relic rematch because, as I mentioned, that is for a vacant title in the same division. So should Garcia want to stay at 140, he's got an opportunity to unify titles with the winner of that fight. Garcia is a disappointment to me, a major disappointment. Look, it is his prerogative to live his life the way he wants. You know what I'm saying? Run his career the way he wants. But he looks at himself as a businessman, and he doesn't really like boxing. He does it because he's good at it, and it's a way for him to make money, and he openly admits that. But I don't quite understand what he's trying to do right now. Some people like it. Some people get it. He refuses to work with a promoter. Golden Boy Promotions offered him a 3-fight deal where he could have got Miguel Cotto. He could have that title that Saddam Ali has. That would have been a title in a fourth weight class. And then he could have dropped down and had a crack at Lucas Matisse, which that would have been a title in a fifth weight class because now he's got a title at 147. But of course, before all that, included in that would have been a fight with Jorge Linares at 135, where he could have unified titles and had the lineal championship as a lightweight. So he had a massive opportunity with Golden Boy Promotions. And then he was offered a 50-50 fight, I think, or just a one-off deal from Golden Boy to fight Linares. Again, lineal championship at lightweight with a unified titles, been the man in the division. Didn't want to do it. Instead, he's fighting Sergey Lipinets. And some people will be impressed that he's won a fourth title in a fourth weight class. But let's look at Mikey Garcia's record. Let's just real quickly take a more detailed look. He beat Orlando Salido for a featherweight title. Good quality win. Probably the best win of his career. Okay? No defenses of that title. In his very next fight, his first defense, he missed weight. So he basically pulled a Louis Nery, an Adrien Broner, a Gervonta Davis. That's pretty much the move he pulled in his first defense. So he never had a defense of that featherweight title. He beat Roman Martinez for the super featherweight title. He was actually dropped in that fight, but came back, I think, to stop Martinez. So it was a good quality win for him. He had one defense of that 130-pound title, and then that was it. He decided he wanted to be Mr. Businessman. He wanted to leave Top Rank and sit on the shelf for a couple years and do nothing. Then he comes back with PBC. He beats Dejan Zlatikanin last January for a lightweight belt. No defenses of that WBC lightweight title. It's been over a year, yet the WBC hasn't stripped him. He's had fights, but not at lightweight. And now he's fighting for a title in a completely different weight class, yet the WBC hasn't stripped him. Go figure. So that's the dude's resume. Is that pound for pound? Is that elite? Now he's been dominant. He's beat some good quality fighters. He has technically won world titles, but what's behind the world titles? What's the substance there? I don't look at this guy and see one of the pound for pound best 5 fighters in the world based on accomplishment. Based on skill set? Eye test? Absolutely. Accomplishment? No. The most I can do for this guy is in the lower range of the top 10 pound for pound. I can't rate him any higher than that. Is Garcia really any more that much accomplished than Adrien Broner? Adrien Broner had over 300 amateur fights, has won titles in 4 weight classes. Is he that much more accomplished than Ricky Burns, who won titles in 3 weight classes? Right? If you look at the guys they beat to win those titles, it's pretty weak. It's easy to jump around in weight. I'm not going to say easy. I shouldn't say easy. Let me back up. It's not difficult, I'll just say that, to jump around in weight and do little one-offs for titles here and there, and these selective situations where you hold every advantage. And that's what I see Mikey Garcia doing. So I'm just not that damn impressed. All right, at StubHub Center in Carson, California, the battlegrounds here in the Los Angeles area. Carson technically is a suburb just south of town. It's an ESPN card from Top Rank where there's a lot of prospects fighting on this card. And I do believe they're going to stream those prospects fights. So check that out if you can. In the co-main, an interesting match of prospects, Andy Vincents and Eric De Leon. They're 130 pounders. They're fighting in a 10-rounder. Both guys, first big test. Both guys stepping up here. So we're going to find out which one's a pretender and which one might be a possible contender. Vincents is from San Jose, California. 20-0 with 12 knockouts. De Leon, Mexican-born, but lives in Detroit. 17-0 with 10 knockouts. And I hear a lot about him from my friends and family back there in Detroit. So I've never seen him up close, so it'll be fun to be there ringside to see him and see how he looks. In the main event, Oscar Valdez defending his WBO featherweight title against Scott Quigg. And this is put up or shut up time for Valdez, right? Former Mexican Olympian, 23-0 with 19 knockouts. He's got a few defenses of that featherweight title, but facing his toughest test as a pro, and he's ready. He's 27 years old. So Quigg is a few years older. I think he's 29, so he's 2 years older. He's listed as 5'8", and Valdez is 5'5". So I haven't seen Quigg in person. I can't substantiate if that 5'8's legit or if his publicist is adding an inch. But on paper, he's the taller guy, but Valdez is the thicker guy because he's fought his whole career pretty much at featherweight. Quigg, most of his career at junior featherweight, 122, right? So he had that loss, that split decision loss to Frampton in a very boring fight that, didn't live up to expectations. He's 3-0 since then, since moving up to 126, but he has faced limited opposition. He's really facing the second best opponent of his career in Valdez, and it's the first time fighting a real physical, rugged featherweight that punches with authority, tries to hurt you with every punch. And for Valdez, he's clearly fighting the best opponent of his career, period. So this is an interesting fight, and a lot of people see this as a 50-50 matchup, but I got to tell you, I've thought about this one more and more and more, and just when you look at career trajectory, I like Valdez. I like Valdez fairly wide on the cards. And I'm not quite sure this fight will live up to expectations. I hope I'm wrong, but I don't know if it's going to deliver in terms of action. We will see. All right, guys, that's it for this week's episode. Again, for a while here on YouTube, it's just going to be an audio thing. It doesn't mean we're not going to do other videos, right? We're going to still have interviews and breakdown videos and fight night highlights, the ringside recaps, all that stuff, the rant videos. So just bear with me while we get the studio set up, broken down, and I put my home on the market. Wish me luck selling it. And then we'll be set up with a new, improved, bigger studio. A lot more to come with that. All right, guys. If you're there at StubHub this weekend, come say hi to me. We'll talk some boxing and hang out. I'll see you at the fights.